About to start. I'm going to ask Stephen to start the actual meeting electronically. Yes, he's done that. Thank you very much. Do you have any apologies, please?
Chair, I've got apologies from Councillor Pegg and Councillor Pattison.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Late items to be introduced, I have none. Declarations of interest, please. Okay. What I'm proposing to accept is a suggestion put to me for how we deal with this meeting. That is basically, we look at how the council plan was refreshed and consulted on and prepared for. I'm quite happy for Heather to give a 5-minute max presentation on that. Then 2, the financial context that the budget is in, that is set in inflation, demand, pressures, government funding, etc. And the budget approach linked to partnership themes. Alison will deal with that for 10 minutes maximum. And then 3, scrutinise the council plan and revenue budget alongside each other, i.e. what are our key priorities, what outcomes we want to achieve and how it is resourced. This will include exploring the council plan, pressures and savings. Each partnership theme will be introduced by the strategic directors. They will introduce a brief context and take any questions on this part of scrutiny. Now, what I'm proposing, first of all, we'll have Green City, Rachel North, then Vibrant City, Rachel North, then City of Growth, Rachel North, and then Resilient City, Andy Smith, and then Working Smarter, of course it'll have to be Simon Riley, and then Reserves Forecast, Simon Riley, page 37 of the TFP, and then Capital Programme and Ambition with Simon Riley, and then 6 any areas of scrutiny. What I think what might be helpful is that we try and use the next couple of hours to let Rachel do the first Green City, then we'll have questions on that. Then let Rachel talk about the Vibrant City, then we'll have questions on that, and so on and so forth. If members are happy with that, well, if you're not happy with that, please wave your arms furiously now, or I will. There's always one, isn't there? I'm only joking, Lucy. You want to come in?
Chair, it's not that I'm not happy with that. It's just that I haven't written my notes in that format. So,
I'm sure you're really adaptable. You'll be able to deal with that, Lucy.
I'd like you to be generous if we get things in the wrong places. Now, I'm sure that goes for everybody.
I'm always generous with you, Lucy.
Thank you.
Is my life's mission.
I hope everybody else as well, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Right, okay. Starting off with Green City, Rachel North. Thank you. My apologies. I am sorry. It's Heather first of all for 5 minutes, then Alison for 10 minutes, before we go on to Rachel North. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Chair. So I'll just introduce the council plan before we then obviously go in to talk about the themes. So the last 2 years have been challenging for all sectors as we work to respond to and recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. This has also presented us with many opportunities. We've looked for new ways to work together across the city and recognised that as one, we can deliver more when we work together. We have delivered at pace, focusing on our communities first, and have been creative to deliver better outcomes. The Partnership Board indeed met this afternoon, and actually, as part of that, we did a review of 2021, which really did celebrate, I think, the many achievements that have been delivered in partnership. Despite the challenges brought on by the increasing demands for services and the pandemic, we remain extremely ambitious in our plans for the city. The new council plan, which will replace the existing plan for 2019 to 23, builds on the council's recovery plan and reflects this very strong partnership working in place with our residents, businesses and communities, and reframes our vision, ambitious for Derby, working with the city for the city. Our priorities for the future will be focused around 4 partnership themes. So Green City, protecting and enhancing our environment, a city of growth, creating a modern, smart city with jobs and skills for the future, Vibrant City, reimagining our city with culture at its heart, and Resilient City, working with our communities to improve health, wealth and opportunities. There is also another theme of representing working smarter, which again builds on, I think, a lot of the transformation work that has already been initiated within the council. These themes have been co-produced and adopted by the Citywide Partnership Board, which will help support joined-up planning, cooperation and collaboration across the city in the future. In particular, the council plan sets out the shared ambitions of the city and refocuses investment and priority outcomes to deliver against. It certainly includes the actions that we will take and, most importantly, the differences that local residents and businesses will see as part of that. And obviously, councillors have opportunity to see the detailed council plan in and summary in Appendix 1 and 2. It's worth noting that obviously we need to make sure that the council plan reflects the needs of all our communities, and as part of this process it is obviously out to consultation with the public until the end of January. We are also undertaking an equality impact assessment to just make sure that actually we are addressing the needs of all of the respective groups in terms of the actions that we are putting forward. The council plan will also be underpinned by a delivery plan, which will give more detail in terms of the specific timescales and targets for measures that we are including within the council plan, and that will be developed by April 2022. That's the context that I would like to set. I'm happy to take any questions on it.
Thank you, Chair. So if I just introduce the medium-term financial plan for 22-23 to 24-25, and predominantly the MTFP is structured along the lines of the council plan and is the resource plan for the council to be able to deliver those priorities that Heather's identified within the council plan. So the background to the current MTFP is one of significant uncertainty, given the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the results of which have impacted on the way that our council operates, the needs for our most vulnerable citizens and the income that we rely on to fund our services. Because of the current level of the national economic uncertainty and the widespread pressures on public spending, it's vital that the council understands its financial outlook and continues to plan effectively for the future. The Council's MTFP funding assumptions are based on the provisional local government finance settlement that was issued on the 16th of December, and final settlement figures will be confirmed later this month. In terms of the local government financial picture and the context there, local governments experienced a dramatic rise in costs, and while revenue from council tax and business rates and charges all fell during the pandemic, the government covered the majority of these additional costs and lost income through grants during last financial year, during 2021, with the sector hoping that the comprehensive spending review that was issued in December would address the permanent ongoing impacts. But unfortunately, the comprehensive spending review and the provisional local government finance settlement did not announce the continuation of specific COVID funding for 22-23 onwards. And this has been factored into the operating budget gap agreed by Council, that was agreed by Council last February. But nevertheless, these one-off grants were significant in 21-22, and they amounted to over £13 million. It's clear that demand for services post the initial waves of the pandemic remain, and as a result, the budget strategy is required to respond to the ongoing impact of the demand alongside increased costs in the economy. In the comprehensive spending review, the government announced that local government spending power, and that's the amount of money that local governments have to spend from government grants and council tax and business rates, will rise by 3% in real terms in the year over the spending review period, and that government spending power will be 13% higher in real terms in 24-25 than it was in 19-20. However, contained within these increases were additional grants to cover new significant burdens, such as the adult social care reforms, and the exclusion of these grants means that local government spending power is set to rise at just 1.9% in real terms over the year of the MTFP. To put that into context, the LGA, the Local Government Association, had lobbied for a 2% increase, average annual increase, with the prediction that local government would have to spend nearly 10% more on adult social care and children's care in the care markets. In terms of COVID-19's had a fundamental impact and affected the way that the council works, and elements of this change will relate directly to the crisis, and will largely revert back to normal. However, there is evidence of this magnitude has resulted in the council needing to consider how its businesses and services should operate. In terms of the adult social care reform, the government has recently issued its 10-year vision to improve social care. Within the announcement and in the spending review, 3.6 billion was added to local government to support the reform. It's still unclear of the impact these changes have on core services that we already provide, and the MTFP does include circa 775,000 of additional funding in 22-23, of which will be subject to a separate cabinet report in the year. In terms of the MTFP, you will see in the details in the document that my colleagues will take you through that the savings over the 3-year period amount to 16.5 million, of which 13 million will be deliverable in 22-23. And that's alongside pressures of 26.7 million across the 3-year MTFP period, of which 12.6 million pound will be incurred in 22-23. Children's social care still remains one of the current single biggest risks to the council in terms of the cost of children's social care and also the demands for the service. And whilst significant in-year overspends are being partly managed through expenditure control measures that are being put in place, there's still the risk that this will continue to increase as we go through the course of the MTFP. The Council's social care services for both adults and children continue to face significant challenges, and we know that the provider market is fragile and saturated and is leading to significant increase in costs. And there are high-profile national safeguarding cases recently, which will undoubtedly lead to an increase in referrals into social care as the nation reacts. And we know referrals into children's services are already at an all-time high following the pandemic, with contacts increasing by 14%. I hope that gives you the context of the MTFP that we are discussing this evening. As I say, I'll hand over to my colleagues to go into the details of the proposals contained within the report.
Thank you very much, Alison. What I'm going to do now, bearing in mind what Lucy has asked, is probably have a bit of a hybrid. I'm going to ask Rachel to present the Green City, Vibrant City and City of Growth, and then we'll take questions that there are at that stage. Then I'll take Andy's Resilient City, and then questions after that. And then the other issues with regard to working smarter and reserves and forecasts, Simon Riley, to present all that, and then we'll take questions. After all that, if there may or may not be any recommendations, then we can feel free to discuss, debate, and actually vote on those. So I think that's the way that we'll do it. So, Rachel, over to you for Green City first of all, then Vibrant City, and then City of Growth. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Okay, so just really important to reinforce to Exec Scrutiny that doing the budget process in this way around outcomes is a much more effective way to understand what it is we've got in our resources to meet particular outcome themes, and then make good decisions about how we can make savings in those different areas without impacting on our ambition for those outcomes. So in terms of the Green City, about protecting and enhancing our environment, really critical importance for the Council and for our partners and obviously for the whole world around dealing with climate change, etc. The gross revenue budget in this area, so what the Council spends for growth, which includes external funding and grants and all those things, is 41 million, but its net budget, so the controllable budget that the Council has in this theme, is 29 million. So a relatively small budget, if you like, overall in the Council's overall budget sort of processes. So this theme is about how do we work collectively, and there's a theme across all of these outcomes, and we've said so far in this introduction to this meeting, working with our partners, working with the talents and the assets and the capacity and the resources they've got to get more for what we do as a council, rather than just focusing on what the council can do. So a range of important projects under this theme about how we contribute to getting that enhanced and protected environment. Our city, our river is a great example of that. The flood defence work we've already done, the package 1 has been delivered. We've recently had additional £17 million of funding confirmed through the Environment Agency for package 2. So again, external funding being brought into to enable us to deliver a really important project that protects many houses and businesses in our city and makes things more viable for them to cope with the potential flood risk from the Derwent. The Transforming Cities project, about really improving our transport system in the city, improving connections, but also improving choice. So that again reduces, hopefully, the impact of cars and coming into the city and reduces that carbon impact, again playing into that environmental theme and giving our customers more choice. And that again externally funded, that capital fund for that. And supporting our Climate Commission with their action plan on a range of activities, both in housing, transport and in the community, to try and reduce carbon across the board. And also things like the future fuels work we've got going on, again working in partnership with Toyota. How do we promote the city as a place for future fuel technology, and our Derby Go app that recently went live with the university and with Toyota about how to make good, smart choices about moving around the city. So all of those things are really important things we're delivering under this theme for our city. Many of those things are not funded directly by the council, but of course council resources and staffing are supporting them. So instead of the savings we've come up with, or the ways of being more efficient and more effective and making some reduction in our MTFP obligations in this theme, have been about taking the outcome approach. How do we redesign some of our teams to focus on the outcome rather than focusing on a service? So looking across the board at our resources, particularly in our waste and our climate change and in our transport agendas, and look how we can review some of those teams to get the more effective use out of that resource. To take vacant posts out where we can to reduce that overall cost and be much more effective around that collaboration, quoting that cross-discipline teams. How we were looking at reviewing our car usage around our staff resources, so encouraging staff to work to embrace hybrid working remotely where possible, removing that need for mileage across the city. And again, that's a major cost to the council, paid out in mileage costs to staff. And also renting out the council house and using that rental in terms of improving our rental income to reduce our costs, but also to make more of that Team Derby opportunity for partners to be in our building, again sharing that information and working across the board. And in the waste team, a small saving there around further promoting of our recycling and reducing the inefficiency in that service. So overall, very much about taking at the margins, reviewing, doing things smarter, being efficient, some of those things, and utilising our team resources across the city. If I carry on then, the vibrant theme, and this one I think is really interesting for members is that context. So here, we have a £7.1 million gross revenue budget and a £5.2 million net revenue budget. And you think of some of the things that are really important in this area, the level of funding that is actually in terms of supporting that is relatively small. So Vibrant City, this is about how we reimagine our city with culture at its heart. Lots of plans in here about, again, I mean, it's a bit of a theme for me, coordination, joining things up, being smarter. So we're producing a coordinated overall plan of how we reinvent city centre, not just about what planning do or regeneration or culture, but doing that as one plan. Quite a different way of approaching things, and joining up those plans and projects that exist across the board that all play a part in that reinvention. So things like the Beckett Well projects, the performance venue, Beckett Well, first phase already happening, the project Assemble, the replacement for the assembly rooms on the marketplace, the heart of the city work in the marketplace itself, the Castle Ward development, the Riverside opportunity we have for new housing, and the Riverside Market Hall project. Seeing all of those things as being linked into an overarching plan, looking at how we use our council assets in that context. So our car park provision, Chapel Street, Bold Lane, looking at those sites, seeing how we might be used in that context, about improving and reinventing our city centre. And one of the projects that came out of lots of that thinking about how do we create a vibrant, exciting, dynamic place that people want to live in, and that obviously has a knock-on benefit of increasing our council tax take and our business rates and all of those things that again play into our bottom line. Things like City of Culture, which clearly members are aware we are in the bidding process for that. We're putting in the formal bid after our expression of interest was accepted. We're one of 8 cities in that position in the country. We're now hoping to go through to the next round, and the level of support we've had for that across our partners, across the city, 100 letters of support, a real sense of how that would raise the aspiration of the city. Again, a tiny amount of revenue funding for the council, but the benefit of what we'd get from that that as a whole, quite, hard to put a number on. And a whole range of work to progress how we work in partnership around our events across the city. So the savings in this area are relatively modest, bearing in mind that level of revenue spend that we've got control about. We're looking at how we promote commerciality in our catering service, so really promoting how we can use our catering function across our variety of our leisure centres and into our parks in the most commercial way possible to bring in additional income, but also improve, hopefully, the offer that residents get, and more co-production with our events. So there's no suggestion about removing any funding here from any of our cultural partners, but is about working collectively about how we can co-produce, as we have over the COVID period, on the marketplace and more broadly, doing things across the whole of that team Derby approach across the city. And then in the growth area, where the net budget is 13.4 million and the gross 20.47 million, this is our focus on jobs and skills and employment for our city, really critical to create economic prosperity. Lots of plans and work undergoing on how we diversify our economy, creating new opportunities for employment for the future, how we recognise the COVID impact over the last couple of years, particularly on employment around young people, and focusing on how we promote and maintain progress made in the opportunity area about increasing education and skills for young people into employment. How we support our existing businesses, again, the COVID recovery is critical in this space, and we increase the supply of housing, because we recognise the lack of affordable housing in our city is playing a part in the ability to be able to grow effectively. All of those areas are a priority in terms of the things that we're doing to try and address that growth agenda. Number of individual projects behind that, the housing developments we've got undergoing, the South Derby Growth Zone particularly, again, a levelling up bid successful there of £50 million, so additional external funding coming in to support that A50 junction that unlocks that site. That will increase opportunity of the housing development to come forward. And things like that we're doing in other parts of the portfolios, the work on our city, our river, etc., and other things, make it possible to deliver the Smart Park initiative, which is a fantastic project to bring more jobs into the city, and the Nuclear Advanced Manufacturing Research Centre. So in this area, as the other two, I'll be clear, we have done the same principle. How do we review our staffing, take out vacant posts where they exist, work more in a multidisciplinary way, so we're working across services, reimagining services that are focused on an outcome rather than a service or a particular function. And that enables us to do that. Focusing on our priorities, so removing budgets for our international work we've done in the past, and also making small decreases in our inward investment budgets, small decreases, just to reflect the reality of this sort of pressure on all of our budgets, but focusing our priorities on the key projects I mentioned at the beginning, and the review of land charges in similar ways. I think I would say for those three areas, and obviously this is largely in my areas, I think it's also a recognition we've taken projects out of these areas in the past for the last 10 years. There is a limit to how much we can remove capacity in these areas to carry on with these really critical outcome themes. So we've taken a very sort of pragmatic decision about what's the best thing to do around making savings in these areas.
Thank you very much, Rachel. That was really helpful. I want to take questions and comments now. I've just got a few quick comments, and I think some of them really is a bit of a rehearsal for the budget debate, because I understand the difficulty there is for officers working within the parameters they are. Let me preface everything I'm going to say within that. So, but some issues that have to be discussed and debated, whether they're uncomfortable or not. Unfortunately, the Cabinet member I invited to be here this evening can't make it, he is elsewhere, but I think it's right and proper at the budget meeting that actual politicians do answer some of the questions rather than hiding behind the officers, because they're running the council after all and they're responsible for it, as we would do. I think that's fair. But that's my opinion, which is shared by some, maybe not by all, but there we go. First couple of issues are under green, working in partnership to rewild Allistory Park. Now, in some respects, this is for some controversial, for some very welcome. There is some apprehension that we do get that right, and so that consultation process is absolutely vital. And listening to what people say, there are some fears about maybe that part will become over-commercialised. Well, we need to make sure that happens. Some people fear that it will just be let to go to seed and it's just a cheap way out of ground maintenance. Well, hopefully it's not going to be that. So, as ever, the devil is in the detail. And I think we and the public will welcome that extra detail, and that's why the consultation is important. And hopefully this, unlike the Queen's Leisure Centre, the current administration will take heed of that consultation rather than have it and then just completely disregard it, because, you know, when is consultation not consultation? Is when you ask for it and then do nothing about it. So that's the first point. The second point is on the page under Vibrant. An agreed plan to support transforming our city centre around the marketplace. There's no mention of the assembly rooms. Shh. Again, not being critical of officers at all, but this is the elephant in the room. And that can't be allowed just to continue for years to come, because I'm old enough to remember when we had the hole in the ground opposite the assembly rooms when we were twinned with Beirut, and it was left as a big hole where it was meant to be a hotel, and it was like that for about 10 years, and it was an eyesore. And what we don't want is the assembly rooms to be twinned with Beirut too. So there are issues there. Again, I'm not asking for officers to respond. These are political points that the elected members need to respond to. So there's an exciting and future cultural offer, more city centre living, but again, no mention of the assembly rooms. But that's perhaps for another day. But I'll put down a bit of a marker there. My few comments. I'll take anybody who wishes to speak now or ask questions, starting with Hardiel.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentations from Rachel and co. I think you're right, Chair, that some of the comments and decisions are more political than for officers to deal with, and nevertheless, I think they are worth highlighting some of the points here. And it's a shame that the relevant cabinet minister couldn't be here today for whatever reasons. So I think, Rachel, you mentioned under the green agenda, you talked about, I think throughout the process, you've talked about working in partnership and better coordination, better joined up working, and I hope that does succeed. And that, in many ways, that's nothing new. That should always be the case when we are a council, a leader in the city, that we should be always leading, bringing the main stakeholders around the table, coordinating and sort of working in partnership. So I'm all for that, and I'll support that in any way I can. The two areas I want to sort of just share is that one, I've continuously, on behalf of the Labour Group and the people of Derby, mentioned the Rainsway Recycling Centre and opening it up more. Now, the fact is, the tonnage collected is half the amount that was collected previously. The question for me is, where does it all go? And what plans are there to make sure that the receiving of waste in the recycling facility increases, so that it's not actually being fly-tipped and left out there, particularly in the more deprived and urban communities which I represent and many councillors do as well. So that's a point which I think still doesn't get addressed by the plan or the budget. So I'm hoping that there will be more said and done on that. And I know and I do understand that's more of a political issue as opposed to a office issue, but nevertheless that question does sit there. And the same goes for the Sinfin waste disposal. I think you mentioned in your presentation, Rachel, that we want to progress the waste disposal treatment centre. The fact is, it's closed, but whilst it's closed, it's costing millions to maintain while we're actually going through this process. I dare say, led by the County Council, of deciding of the two choices we have, of shutting it down or reopening it. Reopening seems ambitious, to say the least. I can't see how it's going to do. Closing is going to be a difficult thing. So there's money being spent at the moment. Millions of pounds are being spent just to hold it, maintain it, and while it's shut. So there are two big issues that I think are really challenging, and they need dealing with. and I'm not sure what the plan is for those two. So there are two comments, I think, on the green agenda. The other one is actually making use of renewable energy and electric car usage. We have a fleet, which is very good in the City Council, but what plans are there to increase that fleet and to maximise the use of electric cars, as opposed to continuing to use vehicles which are through fuel of diesel or petrol? So there are some comments and some questions for response, Chair, on the green agenda.
Thank you, Howard. Just before I bring Alan in, the final one I did mention, again, I think personally at this stage, I'm not going to be, beating the officers overhead with a stick on this one, because these are issues that we'll have that political debate at the budget meeting. But I do lay down the marker again about the lack of any mention of the need and demand for a centrally located pool, which after the consultation with the public, they said they actually didn't want Queen's to close, or they wanted it centrally sited. But again, I'll lay down that marker for now anyway. I don't expect a response from the officers particularly on this. Right, I'm going to take, first of all I saw Mike, then I saw Alison, then I saw Lucy. So, no, it was Alan first. So Alan, Mike, Alison, and then Lucy. So Alan, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I'd like to thank Rachel for the presentation. I thought it was a very, very good presentation. I'd like to just go back to the invitation to the Cabinet member who has got another diary commitment at the moment. I understand the invitation for him to attend this meeting was a bit late in the day. It was very last minute from what I understand. But he is available to answer any questions after the meeting. So anybody who has got any questions, please speak direct to the Cabinet member after the meeting. I'd like to also mention the consultation of Queen Street, which was mentioned quite often at the last exec scrutiny committee. And the consultation, I think about 1,300 or 14 answered or took part in that consultation. When you think of the population in Derby of 256,000, the consultation response was, I don't think, large. It was a smallish return on that consultation, and I just want to flag that up. And I also remember the hole in the ground, Chair. So, and I'm sure that the assembly rooms will not result in another hole in the ground. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sure, I'll help you out, Alan, because I'm feeling very charitable. I'm sure you didn't mean to say, because the turnout, in your opinion, for the consultation was small, we should ignore it. I'm sure you didn't mean that.
I'm just saying, Chair, it's quite a smallish response return.
Yeah.
So I do mean that.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Mike, then Alison, then Lucy. Mike.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points, both in the same. Well, I think they're related. On the Vibrant City, first, I have no idea what Project Assemble is, so I'd like some detail on that. And on the same page, it says review council property assets. Now, if my memory is correct, that's appeared in almost every plan for the last 10 years, and there doesn't seem to be an awful lot going on in terms of either using or disposing of properties. And I would just say that the Middleton House has now been empty for some considerable time, and it's a very valuable site, and nothing seems to be happening, Chair.
Thank you. Mine's more a comment, Chair, than a question. I very much agree with you that it's very poor that the Cabinet member isn't here. This is not an unanticipated meeting of the year, the Budget Scrutiny Review meeting. And I'd like to also point out that it's also very disappointing that no substitute has been sent. And actually, you know, that very few of the leading group are here, apart from the very doughty Councillor Grimmadell and the always very competent but somewhat displaced Councillor Holmes. So all in all, what I can say is here they are and here we are. I have a whole series of questions, some perhaps rather detailed, many may think, but there we go. I have looked through the budget in detail as an opposition councillor, and I think it's extremely poor that the leading leaders of the council really are not here to listen to the questions, and they're leaving the officers to respond to criticisms or comments or suggestions that we do have. I do have a series of questions, Chair, but I think they're on item 8, really, which they're kind of budget line questions. So presumably I put those after Simon Riley has spoken. Is that correct? Okay, thanks.
I mean, you may have ones for Andy later on, obviously, but yeah, that's fine. Right, Lucy, thank you.
Thank you. Can I start by saying that I think that it was a good decision to review the council plan. I think that it was, given the last 2 years we've done quite a lot of learning in that, and the idea of working more with the city and breaking down silos, I think it's absolutely right, and we should be doing more of it. So, that is a really positive start. But, and I knew that you knew there was a but coming, I think we've created some new silos. I think we've got these new silos that are now called green, vibrant growth, and probably also people as well, but we're talking about those first 3 now. So, when we're talking about a greener city should be a city in which people don't have to travel as much to get to where they need, to get to the services. We should be talking about local neighbourhoods. But yet, we're talking about a vibrant city centre, and there's no talk about the vibrancy elsewhere than the city centre. So we need to link the vibrancy of localities into the picture and not just the vibrancy of the city centre, because we don't want everybody travelling, because we want them to stay locally, because that is better and greener and actually builds communities more strongly. And similarly, in terms of our growth, we have tremendous opportunities because we know that we've got a climate emergency. I think this is going to be the first formal document that is going to say that our target for carbon neutrality is 2035. I don't think it's actually formally come out before, and we're not celebrating it. It's mentioned in here, but I don't think it's formally come out before. And in fact, in the Cabinet papers last week, it was referred to as 2030. But we have that, but yet our growth agenda is not connected to that, and saying to achieve this carbon neutrality by 2035, we are going to have to do this, 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 and this. And the big thing we're going to have to do in the next 23 years is to work out how we can live with virtually no gas, as well as no petrol, with no coal, but with no gas either. So if we're going to do that, we need to be doing an enormous amount of investment into our building stock as it is at the moment. But the sums we've got included are really small. So that, again, is not joined up. And that, I think, is my biggest sadness about the review of this document, which, as I say, is timely, but I think it's an opportunity that has missed. And I think that's sad for all of us, whatever our prospects, because we've got the fuel bills going up at the moment. We know that they're going to be probably doubling in the next 18 months. And as well as hitting individuals, that is going to hit us as a council as well. And there should be, in our vision, that should be coming through really, really strongly, and it is not there. So I can pick up some of the other more individual points about the plan. So, in terms of green and the headlines about green, I'll find the right page. I had the pages written down somewhere else. We're going to make a difference. Well, in what way are we going to make a difference? Make a difference as a phrase is in the headline is a really weak comment, a difference. We're going to have the skills, jobs and space for the future. Well, what sort of space are we going to have in our city of growth? Does that mean we're going to extend our city boundaries? Is it the right workspaces? Is it open green space? Is that really what we need? Or is it the right spaces that we need? I just feel there's an opportunity being missed here, and I think it's the lack of earlier consultation about this and real engagement during the consultation process for this that has got to where we are now, and I don't think we can correct it in this meeting, Chair.
Thanks, Lucy. So we've got a question from Mike to be answered. I think Lucy was mainly making a statement, and I guess rightly so, she'll probably want to be making those political statements at the budget meeting. We'll find out later whether she has any more recommendations coming from that to the end of the meeting when we chew over those. But do you want to, I've got Shiraz who wants to make a few points now, and then Alan, and then I'll go back to the officers. A, to respond to Mike's question he had about property, and I know Rachel was nodding that she would respond to that. And then if you can pick out any questions you think that Lucy, that you can reply to now, rather than leave it for the controlling group at the budget meeting. So Shiraz and then Alan. Shiraz.
Yeah, very quickly, Chair, I'm not going to comment on the non-attendance of the cabinet member. I mean, a few of the points that I was going to raise, Lucy raised them, but Alan, mentioned sort of a small percentage of people replying to the consultation papers, etc. I think what we've seen, in the last 4 or 5 years is the systematic ignorance this administration has. Motions have been passed in full council, they've chosen to ignore them. Recommendation by the Scrutiny Committee, ignore them. And it's a question, that when something goes right, they want to take credit for it. And if members of the public or opposition parties want to question them, then they hide behind offices. And somehow we've got to put a stop to this and ask this administration to stand up and answer the questions that the members of the public want to know, the opposition want to know. So at least they can have a good idea of, what is happening at the moment. It seems to be sort of smokes and mirrors, that no answers are being given that the public wants to hear. It's all a question of, we'll look at it, we're going to look at this, we're going to look at that. And as I said, in terms of tonight's meeting, yes, a lot of the questions that, will be asked at the end of the, probably going to be the same by all councillors. But I think somehow we must have to try to make this administration, answer the questions, answer their obligation to serve the members of the public of this city, listen to consultation results, and listen to what recommendations and motions are being passed in the full council.
Thank you, Shiraz. I'm going to, at the end of this, make a recommendation regarding that, because I've just, thank you for reminding me, and we can debate that shortly. Alan, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, for allowing Doughty, Councillor Grimdale, to come back. I just want to make the observation to Councillor Martin that the Cabinet member was invited at the last minute. He had no pre-warning, and no other Cabinet member was invited to come along to this meeting this evening. So I just want to make that observation. Thank you.
If I can just remind the Doughty Councillor Grimdale that the Cabinet member and his colleagues knew that this executive scrutiny was coming this evening. We shouldn't have to drag them kicking and screaming here. And then, I'm sorry, I've got a girls' guide sort of troop I need to address in Mickleover or whatever. It's about priorities. Well, it could be Girl Guide, it could be anything. It could be Boy Scout, so but it could be anything. But I think that this is important. Yes, it may have been late in the day, but we don't need officers defending that decision as well, if I can just remind officers. The point has been made, whether it was 1 hour before the meeting or 5 hours before the meeting, Cabinet members knew when this meeting was, and they should have offered themselves up for being here or a replacement. It's as simple as that. Okay, that was Alan. Who else wants to come in? Rachel, you could come back on the questions, please, that Mike answered, and the one or two, I think, within Lucy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. So some of the questions. The question was asked about how we improving our electric fleet for our staff, our workforce, and we are definitely working on plans to increase the number of hybrid type electric cars that can be used by staff. We're actually at the moment exploring a hybrid stroke hydrogen car for the Mayor as well, as being really important that the Mayor is sort of leading by example. Project Assemble is the name we've given to the replacement for the assembly rooms. So it is a project very much in partnership. So working with the university and the theatre in relocating the Derby Theatre to that site with auxiliary use. It's a large site. So it's a project that's been worked through with partners on what we can do to really maximise the wonderful opportunity of that part of the city and the city centre and the marketplace to really enhance our city reinvention. And I think I'll leave the asset review question for Simon to answer. But in terms of the silos that Councillor Kerr mentioned, I think when we're looking at the council's budget, we can cut and dice it any way we like. That's one of the realities, I think, is the budget process is. By doing it this way, we're making sure we don't make unintended consequences of decisions about cutting things or changing things that have an impact into a theme. So it's not perfect, but I think it's a way of trying to avoid that happening. But of course, it doesn't take away from the fact that the council as a whole is working collectively on those collective objectives and trying not to put things in boxes that make it difficult for us. I think that was all the questions I wrote down.
Thank you, Rachel. Okay, that is... Simon, did you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So, Councillor Carr's quite right that property rationalisation has probably been in every budget report for the past 20 years for this council. For you as ward councillors will recognise there are assets that could be reprovisioned, it could be used for community assets, need to be brought back into use or need to be maintained to a higher standard. And though this council has been successful in a series of disposals of assets which are no longer required for operational requirements, I think our asset management plan has to become a lot more focused about what that asset is delivering and investing it properly for future through what is called whole life costing and everything else, because we should be proud of the assets we have and the community outcomes they can deliver, and that is the intention going forward, that we stop viewing it as a pavilion, we view it as something that could be used for alternative purpose, or if not, then should we reduce our liability by either selling or knocking down or anything else. So hopefully that gives a context of a different lens to a perennial problem. And just Chair, the portfolio holder was invited this morning. It's normal at the scrutiny panel that the portfolio holders get invited from the Chair. So just to give that context of when the invite happened. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Right, moving on to Resilient City, Andy Smith. Andy.
Thanks, Chair. The resilient theme in our council plan has three strategic outcomes: to reduce inequalities in our communities with healthier residents, for our communities to be empowered, strong and independent, and for Derby to be a safe city where those that need support can access it at the right time for them. This theme has by far the biggest gross budget of all the themes combined, and then some, with a gross revenue budget of 480 million for delivering services within this priority area, with a net revenue budget of 170 million. There's a wide range of things that we want to do with and for the city, with a strategic focus on a number of things I just wanted to summarise, Chair, if I may. So working with the strengths and assets of our communities and building on the successful work the Council has done alongside the voluntary sector and our statutory partners throughout the pandemic as we further develop our integrated locality approach and our better together operating model of support. Facilitating a range of housing that meets the city's needs and provides suitable accommodation for vulnerable people so that fewer people are at risk of homelessness and there is a more affordable housing and housing of a decent standard. Ensuring that across the council we work in a coordinated and joined up way to manage demand for statutory services, particularly in children's and adult social care, building on the success of the council's demand management programme. And this is also about the sufficiency and sustainability of placements for children in care. The council being an equal partner with the NHS in the development of the integrated care system, looking at further opportunities to integrate health and social care that both benefit our communities and help manage demand. Ensuring that we have effective services that safeguard and protect children and vulnerable adults and also support children and young people who have special educational needs and disabilities. It includes all of the statutory functions around community safety and public protection and also around the statutory requirements of public health and the work we're doing with our partners around some of our key priority programmes such as reducing health inequalities and childhood obesity. The pressures outlined in the MTFP reflect the narrative and commentary in the body of the main report on the costs and demand of children's social care, particularly the costs of placements for looked after children and legal costs, and Alison outlined that in her earlier presentation. Some also reflect the increasing numbers of children who will leave care and secure permanency through things such as adoption, or where other orders have been made or planning to be made where an allowance is payable to their adoptive parents or carers. So this should be viewed positively, even though it creates a pressure because of the increasing numbers of children. It outlines the increase in the numbers of children and young people who have a SEND need and an education, health and care plan where the council is required to provide transport. On the adult side, there are pressures which reflect the forecasted increase in client numbers and the rise in the national living wage, which increases by around 6.6% from April. All other pressures in adults will be covered as agreed with health through the inflationary increase we've already received on the Better Care Fund, which reflects the maturity of the relationships that we have in adult social care with the CCG in the integrated care system. And it starts to reflect some of the changes we expect to see through the reforms in adult social care, which Alison outlined and will be subject to a further cabinet paper once we get a bit more information about that. The savings outlined in the MTFP can be summarised again in a number of broad themes. We've got themes around maximising income and debt recovery, demand management, particularly work to appropriately and safely prevent children coming into care and exiting children down from care when it's safe to do so and in line with their plan, increasing our sufficiency and range of placements for children in care and stepping children down from expensive care placements, particularly those out of authority residential placements that are the most expensive, contract efficiencies and different forms of travel for young people with special educational needs and disabilities, reconfiguring and restructuring some teams based on increasing our integration across services as a result of the different ways some services work because of the pandemic, taking out vacant posts where we can and where this doesn't impact adversely on improving outcomes, building on our successful programme of social work reviews and adult social care, and reconfiguring our early help services further so that it can become more targeted and support demand and pressure in children's social care and reflect the strengthening relationship we have with the voluntary sector and increase the new ways of working, particularly through the Youth Alliance arrangements. So, Chair, happy to take questions, but that's just a broad summary of the theme.
Thank you very much for that presentation, Andy. I'm going to take questions now. Alison, first of all. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It won't come as a surprise to anyone that, given that I'm the Shadow Cabinet Member for both CYP and Adults and Health, I hope everyone here will bear with me because I do have a series of points to make. I'm not going to make them all. I'll ask Andy to respond. I'd like to thank Andy for his report and for the work that he does in his role, and also all the hard-working officers, staff, social workers, care workers that we have employed by the council who have some of the most difficult jobs in our society, and they're not always as valued as they should be. And we know the situation is extremely difficult. So one of my questions, which I'm moderate, a bit like I found myself probably surprisingly in a similar situation to Councillor Kerr, is I'm not sure when I should raise questions, so I'm just going to raise them anyway, given the way we're receiving the report. So one of my perhaps later questions on the item 8 will be about whether government funding is actually adequate for Derby, but putting aside that one question for the moment and bearing in mind that context, I would like to first of all refer to Andy's, if I can call you Andy, Mr. Smith, plans to reconfigure early help services. This does involve cuts to youth work and to support for needs in the city. Now, I know there are plans to work more closely with the Youth Alliance in order to make these services, some youth services provided by them, and there are plans to look again at the way the connections PAs work in order to require fewer staff to do the same amount of work. And I'm not saying that any of those initiatives are particularly lacking. What I am saying, and what particularly worries me, is that youth work has been cut to the bone for many years in the city and probably across the country. In terms of NEET, these are some of the most deprived and disaffected young people we have in our society. And what I strongly believe is that rather than reducing this or keeping it to a minimum, we should be developing support for NEETs, enhancing the service, and also retaining our own ability as a council to offer a youth service to the city. And so those cuts, I know, amount to £303,000. I would like, for the sake of I have spoken to Andy about this previously, but for the sake of the rest of the councillors here, I would like Andy to explain a little bit how on earth, in the current climate, when we have growing demands on statutory services, which are often come about from people who've had dysfunctional early lives, how on earth we can justify this cuts to those services. Thank you.
Yeah, I will invite Andy to answer that shortly, and I'm sure you'll be asking, even more importantly, the Cabinet member to explain that at the budget meeting. So I understand that, but we don't have the Cabinet member here to do that. So Andy will answer it as best he can from an officer's point of view with the constraints he's actually got. So there's that. I'm going to take Hardiel, first of all, a question from Hardiel, then I'll let Andy come back to both, if that's all right. Hardiel, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I think just following on, I was going to make the same point about youth services and cuts. They've been going on for a number of years, not entirely the fault of officers and the council, because central government funding has been coming down, 24-25% reduction in funding for local authorities over the last 8-9 years, bound to have an impact. But nevertheless, support and facilities for particularly the deprived communities, I have to say, is something that always of concern. And in the resilient part of the document, it talks about coordinated approach to investing in our voluntary third and faith sector through co-production. And I think Alison, Councillor Martin alluded to the fact that the reduction in youth service facilities, which help vulnerable children, particularly from our Eastern European communities where abuse and exploitation is highest, and the solution is the Youth Alliance being one of those coordinated groups that can make a difference. And I don't disagree with that, but as I've said before, and I'll say it today, that's not going to happen without resources and funds. And I think that's a question and a challenge, not just for officers, but for politicians to say, we can get all these coordinated alliances, partnerships, and better working. But if we're going to make real impact, lasting impact, it will require funds and resources to be identified. Where are they going to be coming from? What additional funding will be put into these communities to make that difference, that can make can be long lasting? And I think it's the same thing around the idea of Andy mentioned in his bit about better care, working together, integrated care, and that we're equal partners with the NHS in terms of delivering on this. I have to say, if we're going to be equal partners, we won't be able to put equal funding in. And don't want to say too much about the social care levy and how much of that is actually going to come down to local authorities to use, as opposed to it being used up and already identified for this coming year, to actually pop up the NHS and the demands it has been having to be faced through COVID. So I'd like to sort of get a view from Andy, who's presented this bit about those two areas, the aspirations, the priorities, working together, either an equal partnership or whatever, is really good, but it's going to come down to how do we find the resources to actually make those happen, because without those, we won't be able to achieve what we want to do.
Thanks, Hardy. So far we've got the issues that Alison raised about the youth service, about cuts, about NEAT. We've got the issues about aspiration priorities, equal partners. We've got the issues about the Eastern European challenges, about coordinating alliances. So that any more questions over and above those, because we've got those in. So Lucy, if you want to add to that list, please come back in. Thank you. Lucy.
Thank you. I'm wanting to, again, look at the bigger picture, and the paragraph that Hardiel highlighted in terms of working in partnership to streamline our processes, implementing a coordinated approach, investing in our voluntary third and faith sectors, that is absolutely key to everything we should be doing. But it seems to be only there in one paragraph. It isn't the line going through the centre of everything else. Because we know whether you're talking about people who have retired early, people who have got mental health issues, people who are struggling to get into the workforce, actually having something positive and useful and to do within their abilities and within their community can be absolutely the right thing for them. And that is what we should be looking at, not at one bullet point, but through all the services that we are delivering. Now, a large chunk of the first section is working with public health, and it isn't that long since public health were part of the NHS. And the NHS is quite piecemeal in its connection with the wider community. In some ways it is absolutely brilliant. There are hundreds of people who volunteer at the Royal Derby. But in other ways it is very driven by process and professional expectations, and not as good, I think, as councils are working within the wider community. But we need to take the thinking that is in that bullet point and deliver it everywhere, because we're not going to get more foster carers without the community feeling that they are engaged in helping young people. We're not going to get the youth services without people wanting to work with a different set of young people. We're not going to get the support for older people without, again, that engagement. We're not going to be able to work, breaking down the silo, into the growth agenda and take people who have been working in the retail sector and pinpointing the opportunities for them in the care sector. We need to do that joining up, and we need to do it more and more. I can't see it here yet, but if we can move some of our resources into doing that, it may well create the resource that we need to deliver our outputs. It doesn't seem to be here. And I don't think the money is there to do it because we haven't yet put it in the right pots. But it's my hope that it's not too late to move something in that direction because the urgency is now.
Thanks, Lucy. If I can, Alison, do you want to come back before I get Andy back in to answer?
I'm not sure how you want to proceed, Chair, because I have another question on looked after children and the dysfunctional care market. So do you want to take those now and answer?
If you have a question for Andy on that, please ask it now. In terms of recommendations, we'll take those at the very end.
Okay, right. I do have some recommendations too. You might need to take notes, Andy, as you've got to take all of the, you've got your pencil.
Yeah, if you can say the recommendations till later, Alison. But,
okay, yeah, no, I have questions. Okay. So I do appreciate the efforts that have been made by children's services to reduce the number of children in care. This is probably not an ideal situation for many young people, although it is obviously necessary when they are in care. If they're taken into care, it's necessary. I understand that there is a private care market for looking after children, which is currently exploiting the situation of council need by charging very high amounts for looking after people, young children. And I also understand that there have been one or two hiccups that were not anticipated in providing in-house services for looked after children. And I do appreciate what officers and Andy are doing to try and resolve some of those situations. However, if you look at the budget that we have before us laid out in the MTFP, I think you have to start questioning, you know, whether some of the proposals, if you look at it line by line, are actually very realistic as to what can be done. My understanding is that since 1819, there's been overall a 14% increase in looked after children and an £11 million increase in placement costs. So what, given that the underlying trend, despite a recent fall in the number of children in care, we've got an underlying trend, and it's true across the country, of more and more children in care. So I want to know what increases in placement numbers and associated cost have been budgeted for not just next year, but for the next 3 financial year, which is that covered by the plan. So the other question I would ask as well, we know the care market is problematic in some ways, and I'd want to know what lobbying have we actually done as a council on this rather dysfunctional care market. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Andy, I think you got a number of those that you may of questions that were made earlier, and now we have more and more children in care. What are the figures for the next 3 years, and about the care markets, and about what lobbying has taken place? Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Can I start with early help? I'll try and go through in that order, although there's definite crossover between Hardil and Lucy's questions, and I've got some reflections on that. I think just in terms of putting the early help suite of savings into context, just talk a little bit about our early help service. Our early help service over the past 2 years has really had to respond and develop in response to the demand in children's social care, and it's been on a journey to become a much more targeted service in its approach, very much supporting children's social care in particularly preventing children from coming into the care system, but then actually supporting social workers in their direct work with families. So for example, our Staying Together team, which is now a core element of our early help service, has a key role in helping us keep teenagers out of the care system. And since it came into being at the autumn of 2020, has probably saved the council in terms of placement costs around £1 million. And we've worked with well over 70 children who are on the edge of care. So this is really tangible, and I think still at the heart of what a good early help service should be providing. And this MTFP really is about trying to help us build on this approach, but also it reflects the increasing maturity that we have with the voluntary sector and the development of our locality work out in communities around how our early help teams are working in localities. So if I can just talk a little bit about the youth work, just to pick up on Councillor Martin's point. So we have a very small offer for youth work. We have an establishment that is only 8.8 FTE, and currently the service undertakes some universal youth club work, but it's very limited and is increasingly becoming much more targeted and working with young people who are either missing from home or on the edge of being at risk of being exploited. So they're supporting young people who you could see are much more targeted or might even be open to children's social care. And what this proposal is about a reduction of 3.9 FTE from an establishment of 8.8 FTE. So it's, it is a reduction. But in doing that, that will enable the service to absolutely focus on some of the higher profile work. But more importantly, it will mean that some of the youth work that currently might be seen to be more universal would be essentially coordinated by our Youth Alliance, who would then signpost young people into provision within the community. And that's something that has worked quite effectively already in some cases, and it's something that we'd want to build upon through the Effective Alliance model. So that is the kind of context around the youth. On the NEET and the connections, personal advisors, that has an establishment currently of 7.4 FTE, and we're looking at a reduction in 3 FTE around our support for young people at risk of NEET. And essentially, this reflects the changes to practice as a result of working in a COVID context. So there's been a really large emphasis on virtual working and contact with young people rather than meeting traditionally at an office space. And so there are natural efficiencies through working in that way that we think won't impact on the core offer that we provide. And there will still be sufficient FTE capacity across all of our locality areas with a focus on NEET. So we think that performance will be maintained in that particular area. And I think that what we will be left with is an early help service that has at its heart the real core values of early intervention, but we have to reposition our early help service to be less of a, well, it hasn't been a universal service for some years, but to be really focused on increasing the capacity and the work that it can do in preventing particularly teenagers from coming into care, building on the Staying Together model, to really build upon the approach that we're taking around our work in communities and through the Better Together model and the work through the Alliance, and trying to build on the good work that we've been doing during the pandemic in our interface and work with the voluntary sector. And it has to support children's social care, which, I think members have reflected on, and Alison reflected on, is under considerable pressure in terms of the demand that's coming into the system. So I think the service is adapted given the particular context that we're talking about. I think just to pick up on the kind of issues around particularly the council's relationship with the NHS and integration, I think that's really important, and I think it's been at the heart of a lot of the work that we do. There is a strong relationship between adult social care particularly and the NHS, and that's reflected through the really quite significant amounts of money that we are able to receive into the council through the Better Care Fund, which is very much about the integration of health and social care, and we are quite high in terms of the amount of funding that we receive. I think we're something like 7th in the country in terms of the amount of Better Care Fund that comes into the council that pays for some of our core services, and that's through, I would argue, the kind of maturity of the relationships that we have strategically with health. It doesn't feel as if we are a partner that's invited to the table. It feels as if we are an equal member of the integrated care system, and that's really come to the fore throughout particularly how we've been dealing with the pandemic. And it's about trying to build on some of the really good examples of integration that we've got, that your members will be familiar with, thinking particularly about the hospital Home First team, for example, how we really try and integrate social work, social care with health. And it's about looking at the opportunities as we develop much more of a place-based focus, the opportunities that arise through the integrated care system, which is very much about trying to shift resources from what you might see as the acute sector or the hospital sector into communities, which I know we've been talking about for years, and we've been talking about that in different administrations. I mean, Martin and I used to talk about it a lot when you were the cabinet member, Martin, but I think the ICS does really present us with an opportunity to really kind of shift some of those resources, and I think building on the kind of strong relationships that we've got. And I think that also picks up on your points, Lucy, around the kind of relationship and credibility that public health have got in that context as well, because there are a range of strategic priorities and statutory responsibilities that we have to deliver as a council in relation to public health, and there's going to be a real focus in the integrated care system on what our kind of strategic intent or priorities are as a system. And there's been a real focus on health inequalities and on the impact of particularly some of the COVID scarrings that we're seeing in our communities. And I think we've got a very different lens on the range of services the council provides and commissions in public health than we've maybe ever had before because of COVID. So we're trying to maximise the advantage there. I think the point Lucy raised around the role of community and integration, you know, I think look beyond the words, I think I'd probably say. I think although it is absolutely, you know, clearly in black and white in the council plan, I think the whole approach to how we're going to be working together strategically and operationally with not just across our council services much more horizontally, but also with our partners and the voluntary sector is going to be integral to how we do things differently. I think without that, we run the risk of continuing to work in a very much a silo way and very much in terms of our, you know, thinking about a service rather than thinking about an outcome. If I move on to looked after children and some of the reflections from Alison, I mean, I would absolutely agree on the dysfunction in the care market and the challenges that presents the council in terms of wider sufficiency. I mean, it's outlined very clearly in the report, and it remains a challenge for Derby as it does for many, many councils. And I think we wait with interest and I think impatience in terms of the outcome of the Care Market Authority review that's currently underway and also the care review that's being led by the government. That's really got to deliver for us because, you know, this is our significant, probably our most significant financial challenge that we have got. In terms of what's in the NTFP, we've got £7 million of pressures next year and then £6 million in the next 2 years for social care. That includes both adults and children's, and you know that's currently what is reflected in the budget. I mean, clearly there's significant elements in the budget that is around demand management. It's around looking at how we can safely try and both prevent children coming in, but also move children out the other end, so that we can try and challenge our assumptions and get underneath the work. And just to add a bit of context to that, if I can just finally, Martin, it's not in the budget report, but just in terms of the here and now, where we are today. At the beginning of this financial year, we had forecasted that by the end of this financial year, we'd have in the region of 683 lakh in the system based on where we were and based on the kind of trajectories. But clearly, when you start to then overlay some of the demand management work that we've been doing, which is successful, which I know you don't always see when you see an overspend, but when you start to scratch underneath that, you can see some real impact. Our numbers today are 627, and that doesn't just happen out of nowhere. That is a result, I would argue, of the work that we're doing, both prevention and also exit the other end. Thanks, Martin.
Thank you, Andy. As we said, what we'll do, we've got a whole series of presentations, then it's questions. What I want to try and avoid, if it's all possible, is we just keep going back, because that way we're now about just under an hour and a half in. We've got at least half to go again. We've got the Simon to talk about working smarter. Then we want to look at reserves. Then we want to look at recommendations. So I will take Hardiel now, and I will take you, Alison. But then if we can, then, as I say, move on to to Simon, and then want recommendations. So Hardiel.
Thank you.
And then Alison, but remember, we have got the budget. This is for scrutiny and recommendations, primarily, I see it as.
I mean, this will lead into the budget discussion, which I hope we'll be having later on. I think Andy mentioned two things which I wanted to just focus on: demand management and signposting, in response to the questions we asked. And they're really important points because it's a difficult task, because if there's not enough money to meet the demand, officers and everybody starts talking about demand management. And that often means cutting services. And the best example that Andy articulated on the question that I asked and Alison Martin asked was about the social youth services, nearly 4 point full-time equivalents being cut. And Andy described that as a way of responding to high-profile issues and then using the Youth Alliance partnership to signpost people. Signposting is all well and good, but if the services and the resources are cut, who are you signposting to? And that is a dilemma I think we face, not just in Derby, but right across the country, has local authorities. When funding is cut, and it's well documented in terms of Simon's MTFT report, which is later on we'll be talking about, when funding is cut, talking about alliances and partnerships and better coordination and signposting, that only works if there's money and resources for signposting, and we're talking about having cut youth service facilities to do what? To sort of promote more coordination. So I think those are words we need to be careful of in the whole response to the budget challenge officers have and we have as politicians. Demand management usually means there's less services, and how are we going to cut services? Whether it's raising the threshold for access to services or whatever. And they're themes which are running through the planning, and trying to manage the budget in terms of less funding, and the demand's not decreasing but increasing.
Yeah, I think you're right, Ardil, that the problem as ever is the political decisions of the cuts. So I do have some sympathy with the officers who have to then implement those cuts and find different ways of doing things, but we're not here for showing sympathy this evening. I think we're there for scrutinising the actual debate, and that's where we've got the opportunity now, and then at the budget meeting, for the political decisions that were made. Alison.
Thank you, Chair. And I think whilst we do have sort of limited time in theory, I do think we need to dwell on this point, and I do want to come back on to Andy slightly, if I may. Ideally, I would be coming back to the Cabinet member, Yvonne Williams. Hopefully we'll do that in the budget meeting. But I think this is so important for the Council. All year, since I was elected in May and I took up my shadow cabinet role, I've been hearing that the real problem in the council budget is children's services, and we've heard about somewhat unanticipated events, both the increase in demand, the problems in the care market, and the problems in realising in-house provision as planned. So this is a very, very important issue, because the amounts at stake here, given the level of reserves the council is planning, the low level of reserves that the council is planning to have over the next 2 or 3 years, I believe it goes down to the region of £8 million in 2 years' time, I believe, in that kind of order. We have to say that unanticipated costs of the order of which we experience, even in the first quarter of this year, would mean that the council could be in serious financial difficulties if it doesn't anticipate correctly and realistically the amount that is needed to deliver children's services. I know those amounts are difficult to realise. I do support, and I think they can be effective, the measures around demand management. But then there is the question of unanticipated demand. And given what we're talking about here, particularly in children's services, we're talking about children who are at risk, and the social workers know this far better than I do, and many of us do. There's a very, very serious statutory requirements to care for these children on the part of the council. So what I would suggest is that to say, and with no disrespect to the officers at all, that to say that we can cope with anticipated demand in the order of 7 million next year and 6 million in the subsequent year is extremely optimistic. And I also think it's very optimistic to think that the pressures there can be entirely countered by demand management, because we've already seen in this very year and in previous years unanticipated spikes in demand. But as I repeat, there is an underlying trend for increase in demand. So I am concerned about that. I'd just like to register that concern. I appreciate the council has an extremely difficult budget, but we cannot continue to set a budget for children's services that is not realistic and then be in panic mode in every subsequent year because it is apparently the children's services budget that is posing huge problems for the council's budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. I think there are a number of, understandably, the concerns have been raised and certainly have been noted, and I think we'll raise these again at the budget meeting. So thank you, if I can thank members for that. What I would like to do now, unless there's anything else that we need to do at this stage, is move on to working smarter with Simon Riley, and then looking at the reserve forecasts and the capital programme and the ambitions. So over to Simon, then I say after that, then you've got some time now to think about recommendations that you might want to discuss at the end of that presentation. So over to Simon, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And this theme is our enabling theme, and it's titled Working Smarter, Making Our Council More Efficient and Effective, Accelerating the Pace and Focus of Change. So, like my colleagues before, we spend about 124 million in this area a year with a net budget of 40 million. So it's a big budget providing a wide range of activity, from customer services to property management to support to a number of our vulnerable communities. And just to maybe set the scene, this is an area that has always been in our council plan about trying to seek continuous improvement, but we are now trying to make sure that our infrastructure, our programmes, our partnerships are aligned, as I think Councillor Kerr has talked about, around not creating silos within the council, but making sure where possible we provide the right service in the right place at the right time efficiently, and develop that relationship with partners and communities, because as I think you've heard tonight, this budget is a budget for and with the city. This is not, and it should not be seen just as a budget of the council. So the theme talks about some partnership outcomes. We want an insight-led council that delivers value for money. Value for money comes from a wide range of things, getting insight into our customers to make sure that we provide the right service and our communities, commercialisation, contract management we've heard about, demand management, as well as making sure that how people can transact with us, get information, work with the council is enhanced by digital enablement, redesigned customer services, and our core systems such as a financial management system. So a year ago we used some of the flexibility given by government in respect to capital receipts to invest in our transformation project, and we're, if you want to call it, a good 12 months down the line of creating some of those benefits, which will not only generate a financial gain but actually be seen and be measurable by the people who transact with us, by our communities and by our residents. We are keen in this to make sure that one of our outcomes is that effectively residents feel satisfied and enabled. Satisfaction is obviously one of those terms which is quite difficult, but we all know for our own experience, if we feel that we've been dealt with efficiently, with integrity, and the right information has been provided, that it does change people's behaviour from one of dependency into one where they work with us or sometimes find their own solutions to issues, and we're trying to create a single front door in that respect. And then we want to create this culture of collaboration and working together across the city. So that is, we want to see it within the council, we want to see it in partnerships, and we also want to see it in communities. And we want to make sure, for example, councillors have the right information through the councillor portal, and that we also make sure that we avoid duplication, we deliver on pace, we say, we deliver, we feed back. So Working Smarter is a really exciting programme that supports this concept that we are better together as a city, working for and with the city. So in the pressures, there's a number of areas where we've had to invest in here. That is in respect of ICT, digital security. We've had to address new pressures faced by local governments, such as the increase in the NI levy for social care and health. there's investment that we're making in respect of our capital ambition, and there's also some factual payments we pay in respect to partnerships such as coroners that has increased. The majority of savings that we're proposing in efficiencies for next year is in working smarter. It's about that continuous improvement. And you've heard the themes that we talked about: demand management, commissioning, commercialisation, invest to save projects, digital intelligence-led council, property rationalisation, rationalisation of staff. And all of those are done with a very measured approach of trying to say what is the right capacity to deliver the services that we require, using technology to support us, working for and with the city, and actually creating, hopefully, where the public pound is maximised across the piece. So there's approximately 5.7 million of savings from this area. But as I said earlier, because we started a year ago in a lot of these programmes, a lot of the conditions are being developed that should allow that to be achieved. So that's working smarter broadly, and I'm happy to take questions. In terms of our reserves position, we started this financial year with £123 million worth of reserves. They're both earmarked reserves and general fund reserves. The report talks a lot about financial sustainability and the fact that we need to concentrate on the usable reserves, which in Derby has been the general fund reserve, which is for the rainy day, and what has been termed previously a budget risk reserve. I'd prefer to call it a medium-term financial reserve. And the budget talks about that being 29 million last April, and at the end of a 3-year period being potentially £21 million, with approximately £4 million use in this current financial year. Q3 will show that will reduce, and we will not have to draw down as much reserves as we anticipated. So what is our focus? Well, our focus is to try and avoid, where possible, use of reserves either for funding shocks in demand and or to balance the budget. It has been necessary in this budget to assume £4 million of reserves for the next financial year, but the budget also proposes that in the period of a medium-term financial plan, we put 8.2 million into those two reserves. So at the end of the 3-year period, we anticipate to have approximately 20 to 25 million in those reserves, plus earmarked reserves, which are detailed in the appendix. Councillor Martin asked in the in a question on the how we fund social care and demand management. It is our intention through the spending review panel and demand management to try and manage those demand pressures, any increase in demand, any increase in number of children statutory placed with us, plus most importantly, those who step down from being looked after children, which is a point that I need to make. And one of the judgments I have to make every year is about, are the basis of estimates for calculating the budget robust, and that I have to formally report to you as a council in what is called a Section 25 statement that goes along with the budget. Based on the preparation of this budget, the operation of the panels, the information of activity, some which you've heard from both Alison Parkin and Andy Smith, I believe that this is trying, with the knowledge and intelligence that we have, to properly create the quantum that we'll have to support for children's social care next year. But as Councillor Martin knows, you might get a big family presenting that maybe is coming into the city, and it's not totally within our control, but it is in our control how we find placements, how we manage that placement, and how we manage the influx and step down from there. So overall, I think my message is our reserves position needs to be looked at in the context of financial sustainability, and this budget recognises that, especially in year 2 and year 3, in putting money into reserves. And finally, Chair, in terms of a capital programme, the report details a capital programme of 291 million, split between external funding of approximately 120 million, and from council funding, whether that be borrowing or capital receipts, of 171 million. The programme details a number of schemes that the city will see major benefit from, whether it be the Moorway Sports Village, which will open in the spring, the Transforming Cities, which is a mobility programme which provides much improved connectivity and alternative connectivity for the city, including nodal shift in terms of how people will work within or connect within the city. It includes the Beckett-Well Performance Venue and other projects such as Send, the expansion of Landau that are already included in the capital programme. The report also details further investment in highways and properties of over 10 million, and some of the addressing historical issues such as, for example, the Museum Estates Development Fund, where we've put in an external bid. In the last appendix in the report, it talks about some of the areas of capital ambition. And just to probably highlight, capital ambition isn't just for council funding from borrowing or capital receipts. It's about looking at partnership funding, external funding, maybe entering into new service delivery vehicles to deliver regeneration and other aspects. So it's an ambitious capital programme, quite rightly. There's further ambitions which are detailed in the report, and the borrowing consequences of that are detailed within the medium-term financial plan. So hopefully that sums up the three areas that I was going to present on, Chair.
Thank you very much, Simon, for that comprehensive report. I've got a couple of observations and one question. The question is, in Appendix 21 to 32, we've got down there, review of senior management team. What does this refer to, and how can the £500,000 savings be achieved? So that's the question. Just a couple of points that I wish to make is that I don't know, and I think a lot of my colleagues would agree, that the maximum increase in council tax at a time of recently agreed 4.1% increases in Derby Homes rents, 50% increases that people are facing in gas and electricity prices, petrol prices going up, food prices going up 3.9%. This council tax increase, which is the largest one, would have been put through when the administration said they'll keep council tax to an absolute minimum, could be the straw that breaks the camel's back. That's a comment, a political comment, so I don't expect a response here, but I will expect one at the full budget meeting. Another comment I wish to make are, with the dangerously low levels of reserves and real potential overspending in children's services, this will surely cause real issues down the line for this city in the months and the years to come. So there's one question there, two comments from me. Who else would like to come in? Alison, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Simon. Can you tell me, please, what inflation rate you have assumed in setting the 3-year plan, please? That's one question. I think there is this proposal to increase council tax overall by 2.99%. Can you give us a sense of, how much that means in monetary value? I suppose what I'm driving at, if you just increase council tax by 1% and added the precept of 1% and didn't have the 0.99%, can you have a sense of how much the council then wouldn't be receiving, if you like? Thank you. And I'm also, you've got a pay award in there. Is that, how does that relate to inflation, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Alison. Any more questions? Mike, over to you. So I've got some questions there, a couple of questions from Alison. Mike, thank you.
Well, I've got several questions, but first one, Chair, is on page 32. There's savings of almost £1 million, £920,000 for social work reviews. Well, what are we doing currently that's going to be stopped to save? That's a lot of money. That's one question, Chair. And the other is on page 29, £800,000 from Street Pride and Public Protection. What does this entail, Chair? Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Good. Lucy.
Thank you. Can I ask about page 30, where there is a comment about 300,000. Now, I've written here, I should go back and look at the papers, because I've written cremators, no longer gas, because I think it comes out of the services. Sorry, I think it's coming out of bereavement services, and I just don't know what's happening there. We've also got an expected 170,000 in external income, external advertising income.
You pulled it and then you flipped back again. Alison can't hear and I can't hear. So, sorry, right there.
Okay.
Bear in mind the deaf.
External advertising income is mentioned also on page 30, where we're looking for an extra 170,000, which is additional. And I just wondered how much was already coming in and where this additional advertising income is likely to come from. Can somebody explain what the social impact bonds and related to children's services of 364,000, and it's quite a precise number, and where that's coming from on page 31. I think somebody's already asked about school travel and the travel training, because I think that's part of the home to school travel element, which hopefully somebody will tell us a bit more about. But as part of that, I'm interested to know that where barriers to children travelling independently are identified, how that's going to be fed back into work programmes within highways so that it can become easier not just for young people but for everyone to use those travel facilities. I've got a couple of others, Chair, but do you want to pause there? Shall I go on? On page 32, there's also talk about leisure and business development and £88,000. And I don't know how that differs from the 800,000, which is talked about in commercialisation on page 29, because it's talking about catering, which seems to me to be commercialisation. So I just want to check that we're not double counting. And there's another reference on page 33 to something similar. So I don't want us to be double counting these things. On page 33, we're talking about waste. And I'd like a bit more information about how we're actually working with the public regarding the £50,000 saving. And this might relate to the comments that Hardiel made about the reduction in waste that's actually going to Rainsway and being sorted, which I think quite a lot of it is now ending up in black bins and not being sorted, which is going to add to our waste costs. So it might be something to do with that. The grey mileage, I hope, is going to be looking beyond simple grey mileage and looking at car sharing, walking, bus and cycling, as well as appropriate, as well as encouraging people to use their own vehicles. And then there are quite a lot of areas which are identified as unachievable savings, which are therefore now pressures. And they cover quite a lot of the areas that we've already referred to, that we're expecting more savings, such as in property rationalisation in the grey fleet, in fostering, in waste, in printing, in travel. And why should we be more successful in identifying and achieving savings in those areas now than we were last year? So why is that now possible? And then there's the specifics in the capital about energy projects, where we've got 0 happening proposed for this coming year, though there's something in the year after. And boiler replacements, I would really like to know whether those are actually like-for-like boiler replacements, or whether those are actually going to be moving on into air-sourced heat together with whatever is needed to go for that, because most boilers are going to last more than 15 years, and therefore we should be replacing them now for technology that is appropriate for 2035, and I can't see us doing that at the moment. I'm also concerned about the sum that's put there for adaptations for foster carers, because I've had at least 2 people for who would have become foster carers if their homes were the right shape, size, etc. And £140,000 is not going to be enough to deal with getting those sorts of people into our foster carer network. Thank you.
Okay, so we've got the question from Alison with regard to the inflation rate, what it's likely to be, the question about the 2.99% council tax increases, the monetary value, what it's likely to be, the pay award. There's Mike's question about page 32, the savings of £930,000, about £800,000 street pride. Lucy about page 13, £170,000 savings cuts and the social impact bond. School travel question, page 32, leisure issues, page 29, issues, page 33, issues re-waste, car sharing issues, other pressures and savings, and the foster care adaptation, 140k.
Chair.
Simon, over to you.
Chair, could I add one extra question? Please bear with me, just because I didn't know we were going to do everything exhaustively.
Yeah, okay.
And then,
one additional.
Because I have one final,
okay.
You'll be pleased to know, and very specific question on the budget risk reserve. And I'd just like Simon to explain this detail to me, please. Because this report, item 8 report 4.5.6 does say that 4.35 million will be used from the budget risk reserve in 23-24, and then there's a table given which says 4.5.5, which says we are replenishing reserves in 23-24 by 4.6 million. So can he explain that, please? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Alison. Right, I think we've captured all those now. I'm going to let Simon then now go through all those. And then I think, because we're approaching 7 o'clock, that'll be 2 hours, then I think we need to start to think about recommendations. And then it's saving some powder for the budget meetings after that, I suggest. So, Simon, over to you. You've got a whole series there to answer. Thank you.
And congratulations, Chair, on capturing what was on my sheet as well in terms of the questions. So, first of all, the inflation rate. We will provide inflation on specific items of expenditure as opposed to generically. So, for example, concessionary fares, there's inflation attached to that. Any external contracts, there's inflation attached to that. So, for example, adult residential homes, 2.5% inflation. Concessionary fares, 1.5% inflation. External placements, 1.9% inflation, etc. So we are more bespoke than an average inflation. Having said that, we have to have a look at this in the context of where inflation may or may not go. And the view of the market is that the current inflation rate, which is running high, the CPI is running at somewhere between 5 and 7% during the course of next year, will gravitate down to the sort of more of a norm for the Bank of England and the Treasury try and achieve it at 2%. So we've tried to be pragmatic and also to say that we would not provide for all inflation, and departments would have to look at efficiencies to achieve that. In respect of the council tax, approximately 1% in council tax raises about £1 million of council tax. So 2.99% is obviously about £3 million of increased council tax. Just to give the context of that, the government does assume that we'll increase council tax by the maximum. And when Alison Parkin talked about the introduction, obviously the core spending power, which she highlighted of, I think it was 1.9%, reference the fact that the government assumes will increase council tax by the maximum, which for next financial year is 2.99%, including the social care precept. That is a decision, obviously, for every council locally to determine. The pay award going forward is 1.5%. It is unclear what the pay pressures will be both in private and public sector pay awards, and you may be aware that unions are currently balloting on the pay awards still not settled for 21-22. That remains a risk that if our pay award is higher than we've budgeted, we'd have to take from contingency or reserves to achieve that. In terms of external advertising income, that is what we have already banked from going out and retendering the advertising contract in the city and including on bus stops, and it's in Heather's team, so if necessary she can add to that if you're interested in respect of that. But that's a classic case of where, looking at the assets we have and commercialisation, we've been able to increase the increase. In terms of some of the questions on property rationalisation and boiler replacements, that Councillor Kerr mentioned, there's a